I just will quickly introduce myself. I'm Dr. Bernadette Highland Wood, the moderator for commercialization and entrepreneurship. And I've been talking to many of you by the discussion forum and some by email. So welcome to today's week 3 live Q&A session with a guest entrepreneur, Dr. Clarissa Yates. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which I'm doing my research and teaching, the Turrbal and Yuggera people, who are the First Nations owners of the lands where I am at QUT. And I wish to pay respects to their elders, lores, customs, and creation spirits, and recognize that these places have been places of teaching, learning, and research for many thousands of years, and we continue in that tradition. So, week 3, we have been discussing protecting our research ideas. So, you will have hopefully begun to take a look at the content, maybe you're all the way through it, around IP, and it's specifically tailored to IP for researchers and the broad range of intellectual property and ways of protecting it in particular that are open to you. There were some new links this year around lawsuits with OpenAI, which had a huge lawsuit brought against it regarding copyright infringement, as you can imagine. I personally know a colleague who wrote a book on evolutionary biology, and her book was entirely slurped up by OpenAI, and she had very mixed feelings about getting financial compensation from OpenAI. I think in the end she took it. But clearly a lot of people were very uncomfortable with the fact that their copyright was violated, and it was used to train large language models. And once data goes into large language models, you can't extract it. So it's in there. It's in a big graph database, and if anybody ever wants to talk about that, it's a particular research interest of mine. And then Hollywood's Screen Actors Guild, the Union for Actors, was also one of the reading articles. So we can take all that up in our discussion time. I won't take away from the valuable time that we have with Clarissa Yates. So without further ado, I will bring up Clarissa's slides, and I will give a very quick introduction to Clarissa. Where did I put your slides? Here we are. So by way of quick introduction, Clarissa is the founder and CEO of Ketum, an early-stage Brisbane-based health biotech venture that is addressing a real and underserved problem, which is earlier identification of perinatal or postpartum depression using a blood-based biomarker test with AI-enabled risk scoring. So, in preparing for today, I learned a new term, a term for a diagnostic startup that focuses on women, namely, it's called Femtech. So early reports suggest that Ketum is doing many of the right things early, such as securing cohort access, filing their IP, and hopefully some of you will have some questions, and Clarissa can talk about that and respond to it, getting government support early, running validation studies, and shaping workflows around existing prenatal care models. So without further ado, I will turn you over to Clarissa to discuss their early momentum around IP, partnerships, grants, and how she's gone about achieving some excellent founder visibility. Over to you, Clarissa.
Thank you. Thank you, Bernadette. Thanks for having me here. So it's really lovely to meet you, Karen, Fiona. It's very nice to hear what you're doing as well. And so by way of background, I, as said previously, was a late mature age PhD student as well. I had about 10 years working as a research assistant before I decided to then do my PhD. And really the drive to do my PhD was which I'll go into a little bit later, but was when I had my own diagnosis of postpartum depression, and having that understanding firsthand, how little help there was available. That kind of what really drove me to then, move across to Brisbane, because I'm originally from Singapore, then to Perth, and then being able to then use that knowledge to then, launch Ketum Technologies. So I'll get started. So I'll go to the next slide. So I like to always bring up this story because, in an academic sense, I have a failed research background. And the reason why I say that is because, as we all know, when you're trying to go into academia, your track record is, becomes your bread and butter. So if you've been doing a lot of different, I guess, areas of research, it's considered like you're not really a specialist in anything. So then when you try to apply for grants and things like that, and you can't show that you've got a track record in that area that you've chosen to do, it makes it very, very difficult. And so in by definition of academia, I'm considered like a failed, research background because originally I started doing biotechnology, so that's actually my background. So I started off doing a diploma in biotechnology, and then I went on to look into my first job was really into corneal, eye diseases. So, that was kind of my, I guess, the start of my research career. I didn't want to stick with cornea and eye diseases. So it was kind of like, all right, it's the first job that I had, so I might as well do that. And I've got my whole life, to essentially try and get experience in the area that I want to. But of course, we all know that doesn't quite work out that way because research funding is always a struggle. And so you kind of have to go wherever the grants are, right? Wherever, whichever lab has the money. But after that, I moved to UWA where I did my bachelor's degree in molecular biology and biotechnology. And I, was really passionate about, cells and DNA and how we can actually, modify what we have in our genes to help and to translate into disease. So I was really passionate to stay in that area. So even though I couldn't I get the research area that I was interested in, which was, neuroscience in general. I really wanted to make sure that my research experience was around translational medicine. So even if it's in cancer, or even if it's in virology or whatever, because I've worked in so many different labs, all of it have a commonality, which is how does this translate to into clinical impact, right? How can I what are the kind of research that I can do that even if it's a different research area, I'm still learning how I can translate that. So while I was working as a research assistant, because I'm the sort of person that I cannot do just one thing at a time, I decided to also run, two companies at home, which was an e-commerce business. And so a lot of people don't know, but I used to own a cake business. And so I'm actually a very good baker. And so I bribe a lot of my collaborators and people that I cannot pay with cake. And I also, ran a skincare company where I formulated my own, formulas for natural skincare for moms and babies. So I really wanted to stick in that moms and babies sort of area as well. And so when my girls were born, I got diagnosed with postpartum, and I was one of those people where, it's one of those things where, you've got that scientific experience and you kind of know that, there's no stigma around it, but I still felt like I didn't want to, didn't think that anything was wrong. I thought, first baby, you expect this to be hard, all of that. And it kind of like really hit me in my second child where I realized that actually this is not, not a normal sort of baby blues that you get, something much more deeper. And so I think, in general with mental health, it seems to be always the case where, you kind of question, unless you have, schizophrenia, for example, where it's very obvious you've got hallucinations and things like that. But anxiety, depression, autism, all these kind of, I guess, the softer mental health issues, they tend to get overlooked because you can't see it. You can't, it can't be seen from the outside. So then you kind of like, don't really get to pick it up. Anyway, when I recovered from that, and it took me a journey of going on antidepressants and all that, but I really wanted to understand why, how does, is there any biological basis for mental health? Is there any way that we can study it and be able to diagnose or predict, mental episodes a lot sooner than what we see today? So that's when I moved over to UQ, where I did my PhD at the Queensland Brain Institute. And that's where I looked at depression and how could we uncover molecular markers in the blood and how can that correlate to what's happening in the brain. So long story short, while I was in my PhD, I also kind of realized that I think we can all be in that zone where like you just want to get your PhD done, your thesis done, your papers out. But it's really important during that time to try and cultivate what I call soft skills, skills that you may not necessarily learn in your PhD, but like things like presentation skills and like, your reports, your milestone reports and things like that, because it's really helped me to pitch to investors now, which now I look back and go, wow, that was actually quite good training, to have that. And also trying to understand, I think again, we can all be stuck in that research bubble. But if you, extend or, put yourself out there, you can see that I knew at least from very early on, if I really wanted to go into industry or understand translation, regulatory aspects of it was a very important criteria. So I then, spent a year looking at quality control, quality assurance, quality management systems. How does that work in a clinical setting? How do you actually get your research into something that can be that can serve patient care? And that regulatory gap is a very big gap that I think isn't filled very sufficiently. And so once I did that for about a year, then that's when I launched KITIM. I should also say that if you know of, if you heard of the Bridge Tech program, that was also a program that I participated in, and QUT actually was the place that helped me to get through, the application and the fellowship and all of that. So if you see experiences like this come up, I definitely suggest you do it during your PhD. Because after that, once you're no longer a student, it's actually really difficult to get into programs like this. Yeah, next slide. So, like I said, I didn't really feel like academia was for me. I actually, don't get me wrong, I actually love being in the lab. It's like my happy place. I love like doing tissue culture work. So that's my background. I used to spend all day in the tissue culture lab. It could be an apocalypse outside and zombies outside, and I still wouldn't realize that that was happening because I was always in the tissue culture lab all day, every day. And I really enjoyed, the science of it all. But, at the end of the day, it kind of like dawned on me, like, why am I doing this? Like, if this is just to get me another publication and I don't see it, really impact clinical care, then I didn't really see the point of it. So I really wanted to try and understand, translational, medicine. And so, like I said, during my PhD, I actually did my PhD in collaboration with the Mayo Clinic, and that's where I had that first experience of working with human samples, human data, trying to really see if we can find, ways to work with the human data rather than just producing data for the sake of producing data. So yeah, I realized that pretty soon. Next slide. So, like I said, when I was doing my PhD, it kind of dawned on me that I would like to do a startup. This is where I think was the pivotal moment for me, because I think, as we all know, when you're doing your PhDs or your masters and things like that, um, the aim of the game is really to be able to put your publications out there, right? When you can get your theses and all of that. But at the same time, when I was doing my PhD, I knew that a lot of the things I was doing, if I really wanted to be able to commercialize it, this is where you really have to think about your IP. Different universities and different places have different policies around, PhD students and master students owning the IP. But in my case, I was actually the first batch of students where we don't own the IP. So, whatever I was doing in my PhD is owned by the university, which is all fine. But if I wanted to, have a startup independent of my PhD, then I almost had to generate data that was enough for my PhD, but then also keep, I guess, data that I thought was going to be really good for a startup to myself. So in a way, I was almost like playing a double agent where like I had to like make sure I had enough for my PhD, but not so much that I reveal everything and then I got nothing for my startup. So that was interesting for me, but it's only because I knew from the get-go that I wanted to have this as a private entity, and so I had to do it that way. But needless to say, there's a lot of very successful people that have managed to work with their tech transfer office, in being able to license out, their technology or whatever they've discovered in their PhD. So this is just my own experience that I'll share. Next slide. So I thought I would just kind of put this together because people always ask me, like, now that you've been in academia, and I've been in academia for about 12 years before I moved over to, I guess, industry. And, what is the main differences between academia and industry? So, firstly, the success metrics is different, right? So, like I said, when you're in academia, your metrics are publications, citations, grants, your H index. But in industry is very different. It's about your milestones that you can hit, what your revenue is, what your patents are, what is the amount of money that you're bringing in, I guess, from investors, right? Not necessarily from grants. Timeline. So I do realize as well that in academia, you have the luxury, I guess, and the time to be able to just focus on one thing that you're really interested in and spend the next 5, 10 years doing that. And it's pretty, it's you really get to go down the rabbit hole. Whereas with industry, you don't get that luxury. If you have to get it done within a month, you have to get it done within a month. And so it's one of those things where sometimes coming from academia, where you're so used to being able to go down the rabbit hole, and then you go into industry and you're like, yep, no, this is good enough. It may only be like 80% fine, but that's good enough for us to move on to the next product. And so that can be a little bit hard for people to adjust to. The research focus in research is very fundamental. So obviously you get to, explore, you get to really try to understand what one single, protein or one single thing is doing in the whole body. But in industry is very applied. So understanding how it works is not really that important, but it more so can this be applied to a use, whether it's a mechanical use, a clinical use, any use. And then, the thing about academia and industry as well, you do get, I can send the deck as well. I mean, this slide deck as well, if people are interested. But, you do have lower compensation in academia. So it takes a much longer time for you to get to that, that high salary range. And then in industry, you can very easily get twice as much as you would be earning, 2 to 3 times as much as you'll be earning. Linear in academia, you have a tenure track, you kind of like just go for one path, whereas industry, you can do multiple things. And it's very common within big organizations like Thermo Fisher, for example, where you can, you can jump between different paths. So you might start out in quality, but then decide that you actually want to go into business development, and then you decide you actually want to go into compliance. It's quite common for you to be able to switch paths, and then your autonomy as well as your work-life balance. So a lot of people think being in industry is very high stress because you're constantly trying to meet these deadlines. I find that not to be the case. I actually feel that I have a much better work-life balance in industry because a lot of things are just 9 to 5. Like no one really expects you to come in on weekends, look after sales Monday to Sunday sort of thing. So unless you happen to be a lab technician in a corporation, then probably that's your job. But generally, you don't have to do any after hours sort of work. Next slide. So I thought I'll bring this up as well because again, this is another sort of like thing that people say, oh, if you go into industry, then the only money you can get from is from investors. And that's not true. Like in my situation, like, when you're in academia, you've really only got your NHMRC, your ARCs, and your NIH if you're in the US, for example, right? You've got very limited pools of money that you can get, can get funding from. And those pools are shrinking, right? As we all know. So it's getting harder and harder to get research money. But when I switched to industry, I was very surprised actually at the number of grants that you're eligible for. So there's like the MRIFF or the Medical Research Future Fund, which actually allows companies to apply for it. So I don't actually have to worry about whether I'm an academic. I can actually apply straight at KTIM. Southeast Queensland, they have so many industry grants, like the AEA is the Accelerated Economic Grant, where the government is trying to get capabilities, manufacturing capabilities especially. It's one of the strategic priorities of the government. So a lot of companies who are in that manufacturing space, they actually can apply for these grants, and it's quite a big pot of money that you can get. The female founders, these are all like really niche things. So like, for example, I was successful in getting a female founders grant where the Queensland government was trying to encourage more females to take up these sort of executive, founder positions. And so I was able to get it. And it's quite a big chunk of money. It's like $200,000. I suppose I can call it free money because the government just gives it to you and they don't take any equity in the company. They don't expect you to pay, back or whatever. It's literally just here's the money, do whatever you want with it. And other things such as like venture capital, angels, family offices, which are basically very rich families that have their money and they usually want to do it they usually have a cause that they support. And so you can get a lot of money from family offices if it's in the cause that they are interested in as well. So that was actually quite a nice surprise for me. Next slide. So I'll go on to what we're doing. So like Bernadette introduced me earlier in the discussion, I'm really looking at how can we identify blood-based diagnostics for postpartum depression. So, after my own experience, like I said, we all know that, and if you're in the mental health or sort of that space, you would know that really the only way to get, I guess, diagnosed with many mental health conditions is screening questionnaires, right? So it's no different for postpartum. Most moms, it's quite high prevalence, like 1 in 5 moms are affected with postpartum depression. And the only way that they get screened is in their 6 week, postpartum checkups, right? So the moms come in, if you're lucky and you get a good midwife, they may ask you how you're feeling, but most of the time it's about the baby, which is, of course, that's what you have to do. But most moms at that time, sleep deprived and milk coming in and all of that, they're not quite willing to talk much about how they're feeling. So one of the things that what we're doing at Katim is how can we reach the moms that fall through the cracks? And one of the things we realize is that can we develop a screening test that can be done during pregnancy, early in pregnancy, and can we predict which moms are going to get depression? Next slide. So one of the things I like to show people is this, right? It's like I think everyone kind of thinks, oh, being an entrepreneur or being the CEO, being your own boss sounds amazing. No, it's like it's literally just feels like a roller coaster ride for me. It's like 2023, I had an idea during when I finished my PhD, and I go like I'm super excited, and you have this huge exponential kind of everyone's like really excited for you. It's really easy at that time to get people, advisors, and they're all like, yeah, this is amazing. And, a great job. Look at what you're doing and all of that. And then, when I started doing my pilot studies, I was like, is this really working? Like, not sure. And then you can sort of like feel this, like, okay, now I'm actually going to enter what they call the valley of death, where like, okay, I think I have some result. I need to get money, but this is a lot harder than I thought. It's like, trying to pitch to random strangers that you've never met before and say, by the way, can you please give me like $500,000? And I don't know yet whether that's going to give you back whether I can return that money to you. But if you're nice enough to believe in my idea, then that would be great. And then I realized there was a lot of sacrifices as well. So, family sacrifices and at the beginning, just working quite a lot of hours, before I found what was my normal, thinking that, okay, this isn't going to work. Funny story, or I guess the story I always tell is that my husband and I, we actually sold our house in Perth, put the entire profits of the sale into the company. So there were many legitimate times where I was like, I think we're going to lose all the money and we're all going to like sleep in the streets. So, I like in reality, I didn't actually start paying myself a salary until 18 months into the company. And before that, it was really about keeping myself afloat with just a single income and then still driving that passion to try and get the money that I need for the company. And then, it's really about just going through those roller coaster rides. And the nice thing is that, last year in August last year, I managed to close my first capital round. So they were to raise 1.2 million back then, which was I was very happy, made all the sacrifices worth it. But at the same time, I've learned to, manage my expectations and my mental health as well, which I'm sure all of you who are doing your PhDs can relate to that because it's very easy to kind of like go down the rabbit hole and not really think about, you forget to eat and you forget to take time off, especially if you're older with kids, which is the same for me. I felt like my kids were the reason why I took breaks because if it wasn't for my kids, I'll just work 24/7. But because I have kids, I have to pick them up from school and give them dinner. I was actually able to manage my time there. Next slide. So just to give you guys an idea of what I first did, one of the things that I did was really form those partnerships and those collaborations. So this is something that regardless of whether you stay in academia or go to industry, is a really important skill, I think, to have. And the nice thing about Australia in general and what I found is that Australia as a country, we're pretty nice in terms of like most people are pretty happy to give you advice, collaborate with you, etc. Whereas obviously it's a very different story in the US. Like in the US, it's very, very highly competitive. People sort of like lock up their incubators, with keys in lock and key because, of the sabotage that they get from other competing labs and things like that. But this is the study I did at the Mother Hospital. I was able to find a collaborator there that essentially had recruited mums at the hospital. They had given up their blood samples at different time points during their pregnancy, and during that period, they also did a whole bunch of mental health questionnaires. So this is where the data was very, very rich, and we could really understand all the different environmental factors that could affect the blood results, not just the biology. Next slide. So from there, when we did the pilot study, we looked at about 50 moms, 6 months pregnant, so at their 24-week time point. What we did is that we actually went to their EPDS, or the Edinburgh Postnatal Depression Scale, which they did 6 weeks post-birth. We then separated the moms that had a high risk of depression and the moms that had a low risk. And then we went back to their 24-week time point and then took the blood. And then we did a large proteomic sort of study, and we found 12 proteins that were highly significant between the moms that had a high risk and the moms that had a low risk. And it predicted which moms was actually going to get a risk of depression with a 94% specificity. So we were able to predict which moms would be at risk. And so from there, we really then decided, okay, that's a great pilot study. I was able to raise capital based on that finding alone. And then it was about manufacturing. Okay, if you have a product and you have a test, but there's no way to get it into clinic, if the technology you're using is so complex or so expensive that no one would be able to afford it or pay for it, or no hospital would want to adopt it because it's too technically difficult, your story ends there, right? So then I think the difference between research and industry is that for us, having good data is just the beginning. Whether it can be adopted into clinic is the whole other ball game that nobody really prepares you for. But we managed to form an early partnership with a US-based company that have developed a machine that can do our readout. And that machine, they've applied for to be approved as a medical device. So, essentially it means that if we can just show that our tests can be done on this machine, we don't have to do the regulatory, applications for the machine, which saves us a lot of time and money. And then at the end of the day, we're doing something known as the multi-protein risk score. And so we get this prediction. It's a clinical report that gets sent straight to the patients as well as the doctors. Next slide. So one of the other things that I'll just point out as well, I know this seems like a very vanity slide, but I think in reality, all these awards that I've managed to win has brought a lot of, I guess, validation from investors. So before investors do their due diligence on you, they all of them will Google you at some point and look up your LinkedIn profile and whatever. So if you have things that are awards and it may seem like a vanity thing, like a waste of time, but I actually learned a lot from applying for these awards, because a lot of these awards are written in such a way where they ask you to prove what your business model is and what's your strategy and who's your market and what's who are your users. So you actually find that with some of these awards, I actually had to really zone in on what I'm actually doing. And so there are many like the Women in Technology, for example, they have research awards like for research categories. And so I won like a business award. But if you go into some of these other categories, they do go through a very lengthy process of trying to refine your ideas. And I found it actually quite useful. So regardless of whether you win or not, I always find it is a good exercise to do it, especially if you are interested in, and having that kudos and being able to put it on your grants and, and LinkedIn and all of that. I think it's a good thing to do. I think next slide. Yeah, so this is the last slide. So in summary, I guess, one of the things I do say to everyone who's in academia, learn as much as you can while you're a student. A lot of courses that you can do is heavily subsidized, like such as this course that you guys are doing right now. It's a really good opportunity. Research commercialization workshops. Do an internship if you can. So internships doesn't have to be giving up a lot of your time or sacrificing a lot of your time, but even just a couple of hours here and there to just learn what it's like to work in a company, it makes a big difference to your LinkedIn profile and to your CV. There are many entrepreneurship programs if you're interested in joining. And I always say to people, update your LinkedIn profile. Like the amount of contacts and networking and deals that I've actually made on LinkedIn is a bit insane. So especially to my undergrads, that I advise and mentor, I said, update your LinkedIn profile. Don't put a picture of a cute kitten or puppy as your profile picture because that's not going to help. And and so a lot of my students have taken that advice now and really worked hard on their LinkedIn profiles because even for myself, when I'm looking for potential employees, I actually look up LinkedIn. So it may not necessarily be an advertised position. You could just look up LinkedIn and email somebody, and they might be like, "Yeah, sure, let's have a chat." So you have no idea. Networking is great. Think about your exit plan. So if you intend to stay in academia versus not, what are some of the skills you can learn along the way that gives you the ability to capture both sides. So even if you stay in research and you have skills like, quality control and all of that, it still makes your research really solid to have those quality standards in your research. But then again, if you decide to move to industry, then you've also got those skills. So, you can think about how you're going to get skills that are applicable in both fields. So yeah, that's all I have, and I'm very happy to answer questions that anyone might have. Feel free to ask me anything you like.
Thank you. That was excellent, Clarissa. I really, really appreciate it. So there were so many things that resonated with me that thinking, so Clarissa is 20 years on doing what I was involved in Brisbane as well. And there weren't nearly the opportunities around incubators or university programs. I
Mm.
had not at that point done a PhD when I was running a startup in the late 90s and early noughts here. So it's vastly improved, and I really appreciate you calling out um, the value of those networking opportunities. And I would just say to many of the people, although you come from many different universities, a number of your universities are members of Women in Technology, which is a Queensland-based professional networking organization, which has been running for about 28 years. And using networking organizations around your professional community, your domain, are extremely valuable. So, any rate, does I might start if no one has an immediate question, but if you have a question, either you can type it into the chat, and or you can just raise your hand and using the little thing, or you can just unmute yourself and ask the question. But I'm going to begin with asking a question about, you mentioned the US. What for this product are your first markets? Is it Australia and then the US? Is it, what's your market strategy in terms of where you demonstrate its efficacy and then go to next?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So, our market strategy is actually revolves around our regulatory strategy. So I think because I'm working on such a complicated, I guess, product, it will be different for different people, right? So even though we all know that the US is the biggest market, but it's also the most expensive market. So, if you intend to go straight into the US and, you can see and if that's your only market, for example, and that's your only goal, then there's no problem going there. But in terms of the regulatory, getting FDA approval, in terms of the consultants you will need, in terms of like even the clinical trials to do in the US, it's exorbitantly like way more expensive. So it's almost 3, 4 times more expensive than what you would do in Australia. But then on the flip side, if you just do Australia, you're really limiting yourself to only one small little market. So then even if you get regulatory approvals in Australia, it's almost like pointless because like when you try and go to other markets, they go like, oh, like Australia is too small, like we don't consider it useful, your regulations are not useful enough. So you're gonna have to redo everything anyway and get a more higher regulatory body approvals. So I decided to pick for somewhere in the middle. I was like, okay, maybe I'll go for Europe first because Australia's a bit too small and a bit too lax. The US is too expensive and too strict, but Europe seems to be quite nice in the middle. So it also worked out for me because the machine that I'm using already has the CE approval mark for their machine. So I guess for me, I was like, hey, if I can use this machine and partner with this company who then can manufacture my test, if I do all the validation and I get the test approved, it's really easy because then the machine is already approved as well. So I think a lot of people underestimate how much your regulatory strategy actually informs your market strategy. If you're looking at software, like say SaaS, for example, that's fine. You can do it anywhere, then it doesn't matter. But if you're looking at a medical device, if you're looking at anything that requires what we call complex medical device, so mine is the machine itself, and then the test, and then a software or an algorithm that then takes this data. It's like a three thing that I have to, I get different approvals for. So if I can save the regulatory cost and time for one of the things, the device, then of course it's easier for me. So you EU first, and then once you got EU mark, is pretty easy to get TGA because TGA follows the EU quite closely. And then with the US, they require a lot more evidence. So if I can get the data that I need from EU and then Australia, and then do some clinical trials in the US, all of that data can go towards the evidence that the FDA normally requires. And so by that time, hopefully I'm earning some income and revenue already as well. So then it can offset some of the high costs from trying to get your product approved in the US market.
Mm, thank you. That's really, really great. Do we have any questions from the floor, or are you still thinking? Yeah, Karen, just unmute yourself. Thanks.
Yep. Okay, so my question is about probably putting out those metaphorical fires, so like just this course at the moment, so week one is like I'm on fire, I'm doing the quizzes, and then the ethics response comes into my inbox, and I can't deal. And I'm guessing that happens in just, like when you got your startup too, you just can't deal with everything in your mental bandwidth. So my question is, how do you deal with that?
Good question. I tried, to do it on my own, and I realized that the value of or the cost, there's something that's known as what loss cost, loss opportunity for. I always forget what the term is, but it's people forget to calculate the value of your time and that cost opportunity if you were to spend that time doing something else, and that's going to give you more opportunity, right? So in the beginning, I was all like, oh, I need to like not spend any money. I need to try and keep everything really contained. And I tried doing it on my own. And then I realized I was spending weeks and weeks and weeks writing these applications. There are consultants out there, but they cost, a bomb. So I'm almost like, okay, what's going to be the middle ground? So I
Mm,
actually found somebody at the Mother Hospital who her only job is to actually write ethics applications for all the researchers at the Mother. So she's almost like a shared resource. And so anybody at the Mother can say, hey, tap on her shoulders, can you help us? And then she does that. So I only got to know her from somebody else. And I said, hey, can you help me with this? And she was like, sure. And so I didn't have to hire her as somebody full time as an employee, but I just pay her as a consultant. So I saved the cost of not having to pay a full private consultant who literally would charge you an arm and a leg, and then also save the time for myself. And I just said, if you can help me write these ethics applications, I just pay you whatever the Mother is paying you, and she just invoices me every twice a month, and that's how I do it. And she's been with me now for over 2 years, and that's primarily all she does. So yeah, so I'm very happy that she does it because that's her bread and butter. So I don't have to worry about that at all. And I do say that in the early days, you have to be smart because of how you use the money, right? Because if you're in the US, you get thrown a ridiculous amount of money, and you can afford to do all these kind of like specialist consultants and things like that. But you know what? And we live in the day of AI as well. And I think Bernadette, you mentioned earlier in this call, obviously be careful what you share with AI, but honestly, like they do quite a good job as well in helping me write my ethics applications. So don't ever put private, proprietary data or your data that you get from your patients or your all that. Obviously it's under legal paperwork that I don't do that. But things like, oh, I'm writing an ethics application. Can you help me with the introduction part, or can you help me with the design of the study? And it actually does quite a good job, but you just have to read it and make sure that it's not saying nonsense.
yeah, yeah. And I would just add to that because I sit on an ethics committee, there's a tremendous amount on things like ethics, the national standard, the principles for working with Indigenous people
Mm,
in within Australia and overseas. this is all guidance that's freely available. Like these, it's written by in the case of those two things I just mentioned, Australian government agencies. So it's been consumed and probably been trained on lots of ethics applications, which it shouldn't have been. But um, I absolutely agree that there are many things that AI does well. Like anytime you have to go out and synthesize a lot of information that's, non-personally identifiable, it's much faster. It does in it. I can work with AI on things, including ethics applications. Not that I put them in, but I write them
Yeah.
um, in 2 hours that would have taken me 5 days. So
Mm.
huge savings. So that's really, really great. On that note around, since we're talking on AI, um, given that you have this unique product that's combining a blood test biomarker with AI-enabled risk scoring, what consideration, and do you work with experts or do you know this yourself around the data generalization risks? So confounding risks like comorbidities, medication,
Mm.
when the sample was collected,
Yeah.
ethnicity, cohort bias, all those kinds of
Yeah.
things. And how
So
much
you can
are
you
investors
can,
asking you about that?
yeah, so you can imagine that when I did my PhD, this kind of information was not that strictly required, right? Like as long as you sort of like have the right sort of statistics and you kind of like have the right scientific plan, more or less you can get good results and publish it, no problem. But as
Mm,
soon as it becomes a commercial thing, as soon as it becomes something that requires that regulatory aspect, suddenly everything matters. Like even like you said, the way the sample was collected, the time, how long was it been from the blood draw to when you get the plasma, because that makes a big difference. This standardization, or what we call the data harmonization, is one of the biggest problems, I think, in clinical trials, right? So unless you are able to standardize the way these samples are collected, and there are, a lot of like Sonic Healthcare, for example, they have centralized labs now across globally to mitigate this problem and to try and fix this issue. One of the other things that I will say is that because my business model first relied on cohort or like retrospective data, it was really important that the data I got was secure and private, first of all. So I get only de-identified data. I can't identify any of them. But the other thing is that how well was the data kept? So were they like written down on a piece of paper? And I have cohorts where, the study was done in 2009 and literally they were still using paper based where they were circling the answers rather than writing it down, and it was like gigabytes worth, and like I tried my best to try and like use AI to help me like interpret or like just make sure that the circles can be read, and it doesn't, so you have to manually type it in. And I think one of my casual workers spend a lot of time just manually typing it in. But I got other cohorts where it's like beautiful like databases, and like they have these queries where you can query what the I like what the EPDS scores are and things like that. So for me, it was a very critical thing to have all that other data, because when you're
mm,
working with a condition such as postpartum and any heterogeneous sort of very complex traits, I suppose, there are so many confounding factors, right? So for us, what we did is that we very cleverly designed the experiment where we would do all the samples for everyone, but then we would separate the samples out as to a clean and messy cohort. So the clean cohort would be any mom that was pregnant, had a high score of depression, but had no other comorbidities, not any other medication, nothing that could confound the result. And then we use our machine learning, created a predictive algorithm on this clean cohort, and then we use this predictive algorithm on the messy cohort. And so we started adding in all the confounders and trying to figure out what is the confounders that are going to mask our biomarker results, because that's what we
mm,
see. We see this masking of the results. And to your question about the data analysis and all that, I do not have that skill set. So one of my first things to do was find a co-founder that had that skill set,
mm,
and bribe him with lots of cake. And so I said to him, like, I don't have any money to pay you as a co-founder, not at least the rate that you deserve. But if you would like to join me on this vision, then build this company from the ground up. I would love to have your experience. And so he joined the company as a co-founder, and till today. He helps me with my data and my algorithms and my statistics. Really important to find a good co-founder. It's very much like finding a life partner. It really is. And apparently founder breakup is very, very common. So so far we're strong. So that's good.
Great. Yeah, very good. Very important to identify your weaknesses and bring somebody in who's willing to be there for the um, duration, and then to properly structure the equity, the share cap table, such that if they do depart, this is another one. These are hard learned lessons. If they do depart, that they either, there's a range of things you can do. They give up their equity, you
Mm,
give them some money, and you say goodbye and have a good day.
yeah.
Um, but that they can't derail your company. So there's different ways in terms of different types of equity that you can issue to them where they don't have any voting rights, and there's an upside for them for the work that they put into it. But it doesn't make the deal difficult for, say, a family office or an angel network or a Series A investor to come in, because they always kind of want everything in their favor and their benefit. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the equity, the cap table becomes really important, right? When you go talk to investors, investors do not like a messy cap table. So if you got a cap table which shows all the division of the equity to all the different people, if
Mhm.
there's like 100 people on your list that have given you like 5,000 here, 1,000 there, 2,000 there, your investors will be like, nah, this is too messy.
Yeah.
But like your cap table should be clean, and for us, we were quite fortunate that our last round we closed with Angel Loop, which is a angel syndicate in Australia. And so all the angels put in money, but instead of having different like 100 different investors on my cap table, it's all just under Angel Loop. So I just have one line on my cap table, which is very, very good. And definitely early on speak to lawyers. Like for me, I spend most of the money in the company setting up the corporate structure right, setting up the legal requirements right, speaking to ethics people very early on, speaking to governance people very early on, speaking to patent attorneys very early on, saying if I wanted to do this and this and this, how can I make sure that it's protected from day one, right? You don't want to spend 100, 150,000 or whatever it is onto your startup and then realize that you've got to go back and redo everything because you
Mhm.
didn't do the legal stuff right or you didn't do the corporate structure right.
Yep.
So from the get-go, I had all my legal, all my corporate stuff done from day one.
Mhm.
Got governance in, like got my chair of my board really early on as well, which everyone was like, why do you even have a board and a chair yet? That's so unusual. Most people don't have that until they're much later in the company. But I was like, nope, I want to set it up right from day one. And honestly, now that we're at the stage of raising bigger money, we have no issues. Whereas a
Mhm.
lot of my other, I guess, counterparts who didn't do that are like saying, oh man, I regret it. I wish I set up the company structure right and the board right from day one.
Mhm. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, totally concur. It'll make going through due diligence much easier. And I would say it could be because we're many of us are on the call and you're in a femtech business, but female founders do seem to be a bit more methodical when it comes to
Yeah.
setting things up correctly. My observation, and I've founded 4 startups, one sold to a Fortune 100 and another one that was acquired. There's something about a lot of guys who are very good salespeople, and they're a salesy oriented CEO, and they can do big deals and they can talk a big talk. And then there are the more cross your T's and dot your I's
Mm,
CEOs and founders, um, who oftentimes investors want to replace them because they're a bit too pedantic. And that's something you might learn after your first startup. And I was brought in as a professional CEO later because I guess I grew out of that crossing my T's and dotting my I's, or crossing my T's and dotting my I's. Not that I didn't do it, but that I balanced that with
mm,
the sales and closing the deal and all the things that came with getting more experience. But I could not agree more that having an advisory board, which are typically compensated with a very small sub 0.05% of your equity after 2 years of being a good advisor, versus board members who get a little bit more equity. And again, that vests over time. But having clean share cap tables, having that structure set up early, paying for good advisors. When I came to Australia and did my first startup, I didn't know Australian law, and so we got a very rather expensive tier one law firm then called Mellison's. And the partner that I worked with had been to UQ Law School and Harvard, so he could speak both worlds because I knew it was very likely that our first market would be our marquee customers would be in Australia, but then we'd quickly hop over to the US, which is exactly what happened. So getting an accountant, lawyers, ethicists, medical ethicists, etc., is really important for any. I know a number of you have science-oriented.
But the
Um,
whole equity thing is a funny one, right? Because when I first started, I was like, oh, I've got 100% of nothing. So if my company is worth $0, so you almost feel like the 100% of the company is worthless. And so when you go to people, like in the beginning, I was almost like, yeah, have 10%, 5%. Like it just, to me, it was like, this is nothing. I'm just throwing nothing, right? And then after that, I mean, I didn't actually do that, but it was almost like it was incomprehensible to me that you can go to like 0.00 something to give.
yeah,
Thinking to myself, that's so little. But then if you think about the company valuating at say, half $1 billion, for example, and you calculate 0.05% of that, that is
Mhm.
a lot of money. So if you think that your company have the potential to be valued at exit, you have to
Mhm.
think that far in advance. And I was like, okay, now that makes sense to me. If I give away, and I have heard of people that given away 15% of their company to advisors,
Yeah.
15%. And
Mhm.
then at the second round, when they try to invest, investors are like, I'm sorry, you gave away 15% already. Like,
Mhm.
how is that possible? So, it's really important to understand, I guess the financial stuff around your
Mhm.
startup, which is something that I really underestimated, and I had to
Mhm.
teach myself
Yeah.
finance and business school basically, like from
Yeah.
the get-go.
Yeah, there are norms around that as well. Like there would be norms in a particular sector in a particular country. So again, that's all readily available in terms of but yeah, giving anybody anything over 1% unless they've put quite a bit of money into even if it's a good, research idea that doesn't yet have any market demonstration is just something you wouldn't do. Anyone experienced would never give even 1% away to somebody if they didn't put hard-earned cash into it. Maybe your co-founder,
Yeah, because
he,
I'm not paying him anything, and he's somebody that could easily be paid half,
yeah, yeah,
like 500,000 per annum.
yeah,
So it was like, well, I can't afford that, but I'll
yeah,
give you enough equity that would make your time worthwhile.
yeah, good. Yeah, great. Any other questions? Pat, Manisha, uh,
Oh,
CL?
hello.
Huh?
Uh,
Hello.
I I do have a question. Thank you so much for your talk. I found a lot of that really relevant and um addressed a lot of my own like current anxieties and things. So I really appreciate that. I was curious about we've just been talking about getting different advisors on board and accountants and all of this. And I guess like it seems quite obvious when you say it, but I hadn't really considered this in, I guess, the funding side of things. And I know, like, I guess when I'm thinking about applying for academic grants, it's all about, what is the academic contribution? And I'm always thinking about the tech. And so I wonder if you have any advice on how much, uh, I guess, to allocate for this type of, like, setting up the structure of your
Yeah,
company and all of that when you're applying for these
yeah.
applications. And is that something that they're looking for as well when you're applying for the different types of funding? I'm just not sure. You know, I'm not sure what they're looking for and what the expectation would be around that.
Yeah, so good question. I think that the quick answer or the easy answer is that most of this stuff is pretty standard, like in terms of like setting up the corporate structure, setting up the finance stuff at the beginning. So I would say shop around. So like for example, don't just ask one accounting firm and then go with that. Like I've been burned enough times now to know that you definitely want to shop around. So different places can give you, quite it should be a standard price, roughly around this and that. And so if someone comes along and say 3 or 4 times more of that amount, you kind of know it's a red flag. So, like for example, if you go on the ATO's website and you set up a company instead of like a sole trader, it's like a standard price. It's like, I don't know, like a couple $1,000s or something like that. But then if you go to a consultant who might say, yeah, I help you set this up for 10 grand, and you're going like, why do you need $10,000 when I can just do it myself for 2,000? And there are certain things that you definitely want an accountant to do for you, but there are other things that you should definitely be more aware of how much you need to put aside. I would say my biggest cost was the legal stuff at the beginning. So like making sure I have a good patent attorney to give me advice. And so roughly around the ballpark, I was saying this to somebody else, put aside, if you really want to do the proper company structure and all that, at least 50,000 to put aside. And that's really to be very comfortable in setting up the paperwork, the company structure, the governance, the legal, all of that. And that's how much I've spent myself. You can definitely do a bit less than that, but I would say at the minimum it's like going to be at least 25,000 just to be able to get all the different paperwork through. And so when you apply for grants, and if the grants you're applying for have some sort of I guess business outcome, and you can put it as part of the grant as, this is the legal fees. A lot of the grants that I apply for, they allow you to claim to say that these are set up patent costs, for example. These are accounting costs, for example. They do allow you to actually budget for that. Most like research grants do not have that. I don't think so. But if you apply for industry grants, it's kind of expected that you'll have operational costs. And so a lot of these costs will go under operational costs. And they usually don't, they don't say they don't max it, they don't give a cap on it. Like for me, I can, in my most recent grant that I got from Advanced Queensland, I could budget like 30% of that grant just towards administrative costs. So like ethics costs, legal costs, patent costs. So it's quite a huge chunk of money that I can put on the grant to be able to say I want to use it for all these different things. For not for profit, it's the same thing. So you just have to be able to show when you apply for these grants, and a lot of these grants sometimes are specifically for not-for-profits as well. So then other commercial companies like myself cannot actually apply for those grants. So there's sometimes it's a little bit I guess the pool is smaller if you're not for profit and you apply for these not-for-profit grants, because it excludes a lot of people, but they are less available. So there are less of these grants available. But when they are available, your chances of getting them can be quite high because there's not a lot of people that will apply for it. But it's the same concept. You still have to be able to show that whatever you're applying for, and the breakdown of the use of those funds and the justification for the use of those funds is very important. So when you do a research grant, you have to justify the use of hiring a postdoc or whatever, same thing. But just that your justification may be, I need $30,000 to put aside for patents because this is the patent strategy, for example. So it's just how you justify the use of the funds.
Yeah, and I would put a plug in, as I said, and I'm not kidding. There is literally tens of thousands of dollars worth of valuable legal guidance in this course if you avail yourself of it. And so this, you can set up a company for as little as $1,000 to set up a legal structure. That's easy, or even less. But getting into, you have a more nuanced product, getting the patents organized and structured, and you go back and forth and writing patents. That's what adds tens of thousands of dollars. The other thing is law firms are kind of like, a tier one law firm. They have what I used to call the cost of opening a file on a client. They don't even really want to deal with you when you start asking them, is that going to be $5,000 or $10,000? It's like, to even have a conversation and get started on your matter is a $20,000 toll that you pay. And that's what it used to be, about $20,000 20 years ago. Now sounds like it's up to $50,000. But the point is, there's also a lot more of that basic knowledge that is available. It's no longer sort of the gatekeepers are no longer the tier one law firms on Eagle Street. At any rate, we are at the end of our time together. I just want to say, Clarissa, thank you so much for an absolutely fascinating talk. There's a lot, I think, that resonated with people, whether they asked questions. Certainly a lot resonated for me. I'm not going to, I think that we could have you back, another time, just to talk about all the things that are unique to where you are in your life, starting a family and balancing all of that, because that's not trivial. And if you're from overseas, not having sometimes a family network, that's what I experienced here. I didn't have a family network to drop the kids off.
No.
And I like the way you frame this, said that the kids gave you, in a way, work-life balance because you had to pick them up from school or have to drop them off at classes or whatever they were doing. I certainly found that. But it does take a very helpful partner to pull that off. So good luck with
No,
all of that.
definitely. But yeah,
And
feel free to reach out anytime. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. So you can always look me up. And yeah,
yeah,
I'm more than happy to contribute any knowledge that I have.
yeah. Thank you, Clarissa. You really lean into it and are an absolutely phenomenal example. And if you're celebrated with a year and a half out with your idea, or less than 2 years out, I think you've got an incredibly bright future. So
Thank
you
you.
sound like, to me, you're doing all the things right, and that's not just happy talk, but you really are doing all those things early that need to get done. And I hope you have a very successful venture, and I'm sure we'll cross paths again.
Yes, we
All right.
will for sure.
All
Thank you
right.
so
Thanks
much,
all. Thank
Thank you
everyone.
you.
so
Thanks to
much
all the
for joining
students for
us.
participating. Thanks, Ola, for being here. Ola is the organizer from the eGrad School. So just give a little, thanks in person with a clap or otherwise.
And
Thank
thank you
you.
for feedback from Fiona. She said it
Thank
was
you.
tremendous session.
Yeah, it was
Thank you
really
so much.
valuable. Very, very helpful.
Thank you,
Thanks a lot.
everyone.
Thank
Thank
you. And
you.
Ola, I'll leave you to turn the recording off. Is that
Yeah,
right?
and
Or will
we'll
I do
share
it?
the recording with anyone who couldn't make it.
Okay. Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thank
See
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.